Good morning and welcome to Psych 250. This is class 15 and this is the summer semester 2017 at North Dakota State University. Today we have one of my all-time favorite classes. This is the Human Sexuality and Gender Identity class. I'm really excited. It's much more focused on human sexuality than gender identity because as we've talked about earlier, most of that development happens earlier, but human sexuality really starts to develop in adolescence, and so I'm really excited about talking about this with you today. Just some housekeeping as we get started. Just a reminder, there is not a quiz this week, so you don't have to do anything today that's due on Monday. But looking ahead at the syllabus, on Monday, your social problem nomination is due. And so this is for our project. And just as a reminder, what we're going to be doing is you're going to be identifying some kind of social problem that exists in North Dakota and identifying how that problem could have adverse effects on the health and well-being over the long term, developmental health and well-being of a marginalized group in the state. So ethnic minorities, women, LGBT people, etc. So I've come up with what I think are appropriate and doable options for the assignment. And so if you go on Blackboard to the project page, you'll see an assignment, and you'll just click onto that, and you'll just vote on the one that you want to talk about. We'll have one though that we pick as a class. The one with the most votes will be the one that we do together. You should, as you're doing it, think about the problem and the developmental implications of that problem from your field. So if you're going into education, think about the educational aspects of this, and you might have to think hard about it. One of them is the food instability for native populations in North Dakota, and you're like, well, I don't know what that has to do with education. Well, think about it. It's all related to, everything is related. All of development is related. So think about how not having enough to eat might affect a person's education, or not having good food, like good quality, good nutritious food to eat, might affect a person's development. So you need to think about that because your portion of the project will be you'll be responsible for talking about the aspect of the developmental issue that relates to your field of study or your proposed field of study. So just be thinking about that. Cast your votes. I will let you guys know by Tuesday what we have picked on. Um, on the opportunities for further learning page, it says that we have Milk. We're watching the film Milk tonight. I'm going to have to cancel that. I've got too much going on. I'm going out of town next week, like I said, and I don't have time to do that tonight. So I will reschedule it. You will have the opportunity to do it. If you just want to watch it on your own, though, you can get it on Amazon for like $2.99 or $3.99. I'm trying to see if I can find it online for free because I think a lot of people prefer to just watch it on their own. I don't know if it's on Netflix or not, but I'll send out an email about that when class is over. Um, Also, looking ahead to next week, as a reminder, we're not going to be watching Mean Girls together on campus because I'm not going to be here. So it's on your own. The good news is it's on Netflix. So if you subscribe to Netflix, you can watch it for free. I'm pretty sure everyone in the world subscribes to Netflix. If you don't, I found a full version on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it's a full version. Obviously didn't watch it on YouTube, but it is there. I've linked it on. It'll be in the class, the Watch the Lecture folder in class for next week. You can also rent it on Amazon if you want to. So, but I think everyone has Netflix. I mean, I've not met very many people who don't have a Netflix account. So, like, if it's a problem, just let me know. But I think that there are plenty of options there for you to watch it. Um, we will have lectures on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week, though. So just be prepared to come or to watch the lectures while I'm gone. All right, I think that's everything. Okay, so today we're talking about sexuality and gender identity in adolescence. And like I said, this is a topic I'm really fascinated about. It's one that I'm not going to say I'm an expert because I don't think anyone could ever claim to be an expert, but it is an area that I've done a lot of research in, a lot of study in, and have a lot of lived experience in. So, um, the thing is, I really enjoy teaching this because it's something that I feel really passionate about. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Um, as we get started, though, I always like to start the class this way, and I think it people are always a little bit surprised. Um, but I mean, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But you all have a sexuality. You all have a gender identity. And you're like, what? I didn't know that. Yes, you do. Everyone does. And so it's not a euphemism for gay or transgender. Everyone has a sexuality and everyone has a gender identity. And they all develop about this, well, the sexualities all develop about the same time. And gender identities all develop about the same time. And they all develop in the same way. So there are no differences between them. The differences are just in who you're attracted to. So as we move forward, I want you to think about that. Think about the fact that you do indeed have a sexuality, and that it's the same as everyone else's in terms of the basics of it. Um, if you have any questions or concerns about the class today, I always encourage you, as I would with any other class, to reach out by email, darcy.corbett, C-O-R-B-I-T-T, hall, H-A-L-L, at ndsu.edu, and I'm happy to talk about it with you. So right off the bat, I'm giving you your discussion question. This is not a get out of jail free card. You can't just not watch the rest of the lecture because the quiz is very heavy on this lecture, FYI. So you want to make sure that you, of course, finish the lecture. But I want you to tell us about your first teenage crush. What did they look like? Why did you like them? What did you do? And when I say what do you do, I don't mean like I don't need details. I want you to know, did you like tell them you like them? Did you just like have a secret crush on them? Like just kind of tell us how it went down. We don't need like gory details, if you know what I mean. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not wanting to live vicariously. Oh God. Okay, I almost like squirted myself with a Diet Coke. Oh Jesus. Oh, okay. Already off to a bad start. All right. Well, let's hit the ground running and get started with actual class. Once I get this Diet Coke fiasco cleaned up. Okay. Human sexuality development really begins with sexual maturation, and this is the process of transitioning physically from a non-reproductive state to a reproductive state. And last time we talked about how puberty is very much defined by this rush of hormones. And in terms of sexual maturation, there's no difference. Sexual maturation occurs when we have an influx of sex hormones, so estrogens and androgens, and that's testosterone. Um, and growth hormones stimulate sexual maturation. So you have this huge onslaught of estrogen or testosterone, well, a combination of both, but depending on if you are biologically male or female, you may have more than one more than the other. And then growth hormone, and this all stimulates this growth. And it stimulates the growth of two different characteristics. The first are primary sex characteristics, and these are your reproductive organs. So these are the things that physically define your biological sex. They don't define your entire biological sex, just the physical aspect of it. So if you're biologically male, that's penis, scrotum, testes. If you're female, that's your ovaries, your uterus, and your vagina. They also stimulate the growth of secondary sex characteristics, and these are visible signs of maturity only. They don't define your biological sex, they just are an indicator of potentially your biological sex, but anybody can have these things. The first are pubic hair and underarm hair, so everyone has that, obviously, and that just demonstrates that you have it, just demonstrates that you've reached sexual maturity. And then in women, breasts. Now, men have breasts as well, but for women, they're much larger. Now, the interesting thing about breasts is that anybody can actually use their breast to breastfeed. The only difference, the reason men don't, is because when women are pregnant and then have a baby, they get this rush of estrogen, which makes their breasts produce milk. So you could actually stimulate breastfeeding in men with the right amount of hormones. It's pretty cool. People like to talk about um, people like to talk about how chromosomes define your biological sex, but the reality is all they do is determine what sex organs grow. The sex organs produce hormones, and that really defines what you look like physically in terms of biological sex. It's pretty fascinating. And actually, this kind of relates back to gender identity, but if you have a transgender teenager, prepubescent teenager, and you block the hormones that their sex organs produce. So if they're male to female and they're producing testosterone or they would, if you block that and only give them estrogen in the same rate that a biologically female um, cisgender girl would be producing, you would actually see the exact same primary, or not primary, but secondary sex characteristics develop. Um, it's pretty fascinating, actually. It's all about hormones. Um, your chromosomes don't make your shoulders a certain size. They don't make your fat distributed in a certain way. It's all about the hormones. So if you can get those hormones changed, you can really like do whatever you want to with a person, just based on how much estrogen or testosterone they have. It's pretty cool. It's like chemistry. Actually, it is chemistry. Okay. Oh God. So you know when it fizzes, I don't know if you knew this, but when a fizzy drink fizzes over, it decarbonates and goes flat. Ugh, it's disgusting. Okay. With sexual maturation for women comes the ability to reproduce. Um, and unfortunately, this means that a period starts to appear. Um, and women can only reproduce once they've had menarche, which is their first period. Now, I promised I would explain periods to people who don't understand. Um, so I think most of the people in this class understand periods from a personal perspective, but I don't know if that you perhaps don't understand exactly what's going on. I mean, I may be wrong. In my experience, most people have no idea what's happening to them, because we don't talk about things that are sexual in nature in our culture, and so people just assume that a lot of different things. But this is essentially what's happening. You remember we talked about in the very first or second week of class when we talked about pregnancy. You've got your ovaries. I really missed the pen in Gate City Auditorium. You've got your ovaries. You've got your fallopian tube. You've got your uterus. And then the opening of the uterus is the vagina. It looks like some kind of cartoony alien. Okay, so your uterus, once a month, prepares for reproduction. And what happens, this is what happens in the whole system. The ovaries spit out little eggs into the fallopian tubes ready for fertilization. And then the uterus creates this lining, this sticky lining. That doesn't go outside of the uterus. This sticky lining which receives the blastocyst once it's been fertilized by the sperm. Remember, the sperm travels up through the vagina into the uterus, up the fallopian tubes to the egg. And if it makes contact and fertilizes, it creates this blastocyst, remember? And then that blastocyst travels down the fallopian tube, connects to this lining, embeds itself into the uterine wall, and then forms the fetus eventually. So that's what's happening once a month. Your body is preparing, and if you want to get pregnant, your best bet is to to calculate when approximately all of this will have taken place, because then you're at your peak reproduction. Now, if this does not happen, if you're not fertilized, your egg is not fertilized, and it doesn't connect itself to this uterine wall, then this lining just kind of like disintegrates and comes out of you. And that, my dear ones, is what a period is. Um, it's essentially your body punishing you for not reproducing. um, it's like, gee, thanks. I thought I was doing like the world a favor by not reproducing. No, but it's not. It's not a punishment. It's just your body saying, okay, we didn't need this. We're getting rid of it. It's painful and disgusting, and like surely there's a better way to do it, but it is what it is. So that's what's happening. And for girls about from the age of 10 and a half to 14, they have the first time that happens, and that's called menarche. And it occurs after the growth spurt. Now, why would it do that? Well, it occurs after the growth spurt because in order to safely reproduce, you have to have enough fat stored. You have to be of the right size in order to survive. And so it's all about survival. Your body literally does not put you through menarche until it thinks that you can survive, or it's pretty sure that you can survive a pregnancy. Now, the good thing is, while you can technically reproduce after you've had your first period, ovum don't actually release during the menstrual cycle for the first 12 to 18 months post menarche. So you've got about a year when after your period when you still are not quite there in terms of, or you're not quite ready to reproduce, which is good. It's sort of like, okay, let's get you adjusted to this period first before we start putting you through childbirth. It's sort of like, I don't know if this is scientific or not, but I'm just going to say it so you'll remember it. It's sort of like it's like a built-in safety feature. It keeps you from getting pregnant, right? Now, that's not saying that you should have, teenagers should have unprotected sex after menarche for a year. Like, don't do it because you never know. The body does what it does, right? Just on average, about 12 to 18 months. Yuck. Okay. I guess I should flip back to the clicker, right? Okay, so what about men? Well, men also began to reproduce um, during puberty, and they can actually reproduce. Okay, men can actually reproduce after spermarchy, which is the first ejaculation. And the ladies are all like, "What?" Yes, this actually happens, and usually at not a great time. You just like ejaculate without any stimulation, without anything happening. Literally, it's like it's like the little timer on a toaster oven. It's just like tick tick tick, bing, and it just happens, and then suddenly you're able to reproduce, and it's like embarrassing because if you're lucky, it happens while you're asleep. If you're not lucky, it happens in public. Um, Yay! Puberty's so much fun. I feel sorry. I actually really do feel sorry for adolescents. I mean, it's pretty awful, everything that you go through physically. This happens between the ages of 12 and 16. And so at that point, you're, you know, able to reproduce and be a father at the age of 12, which is terrifying. Please don't. Prior to this happening, though, what happens? So when you start out, you have you have a penis and scrotum and testes and all that good stuff. But they're not really that fully developed, right? They're still pretty ambiguous looking. And so what happens? Prior to spermarchy, you start to see the testes enlarging. So they go from the size of like a jelly bean to the size of I don't know, the size of a testy. I don't know, like this big. Um, and I mean, I want to say grape. I would show you a picture, but it would be a scientific one and it would be disgusting, so I don't want to. Hopefully, we've all been there and seen one, but and obviously the scrotum and other parts of the penis get to more adult size. Essentially, they're getting big enough to actually do the reproductive act that it's designed for. And the testes, of course, are growing because they're producing testosterone, and the more that they're producing, the more the bigger they get, so that they can actually produce viable sperm. We also start to see the prostate and seminal vesicles enlarge. Okay, and so people are like, what is a prostate and what are seminal vesicles? I'm going to draw a picture. All right, so we've got a dude right here. These are his legs. Don't you love my pictures? I had a teacher in undergrad, she's an English teacher, and she liked to draw with chalk on the board, and her pictures were always awful. But it was like, she made fun of them, so it was okay. So, okay, then you've got like, here's the hips. This dude has very narrow hips. Okay, belly button. All right, so in this area we have the penis, but under the penis we have what's called a prostate. And this is an organ right here. And the prostate is an organ that produces semen. Now, semen is the liquid that carries the sperm. So, actually, when ejaculation occurs, the liquid itself is semen. The sperm is just the little like organism inside, the little gamete inside that's swimming in the liquid. So the seminal vesicles are these little um, ducts, I guess, the best way to call it, that connect up here with the penis. So here you've got the penis, right? Okay. Okay, so that is appalling. I'm gonna erase that because it's making me embarrassed. So you've got um, so that's what you've got. That's what you're dealing with. The prostate is that organ then which produces um, the semen that allows you to actually facilitate the transfer of your gamete to the other partner. Um, yes, and so we'll talk about later the prostate starts to enlarge again when you get older, and that is a problem, and it becomes very painful, and it could transform itself into cancer. The penis reaches its full size around the age of 14. Guys, I'm sorry. I know that is kind of a hard truth to swallow, but it is what it is. Um, you know, 14, you got what you got. About. And then in the first few months post spermarchy, the semen, so the liquid carrying the sperm, only contains a few sperms. So the likelihood of you getting someone pregnant in those first few months is pretty slim because you have to remember all the sperm that you transfer doesn't make it to the egg. So again, it's sort of like a built-in safety feature. Okay, so we've talked about the development of the structures, the physical parts of sex or sexuality. But what is sexuality itself? Sexuality is the biological and psychological attractions, stimulation, and responses that we have to other people. In other words, sexuality isn't just I see someone, I want to have sex with them. It's a lot more complicated than that. It is biological. It has a physical component to it, but it's also psychological. It's emotional. We have this. We're drawn to people. We want to be with them, and the two are not mutually inclusive. It doesn't. But then what that means is there may not be or psychological attraction to someone we're biologically attracted to, and there may not be biological attraction to someone that we're psychologically attracted to, at least not at the beginning. Um, in other words, sexuality is not limited to either one. It can be both. It can be either or. You can see someone and think, "Oh, I really want to be with them," but you just want to be with them in a biological sense. You just want to reproduce with them. Psychologically, you don't really care one way or the other. On the other hand, you could meet someone and be psychologically into them. Be like, "I really am attracted to this person. I really like them." Um, I, you know, I, but it's more of an emotional thing for me, and we'll talk more about in a minute about what that entails, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be ready to reproduce with them right away. Our sexuality, so our biological and psychological attraction, stimulation, and responses that we have to other people, is inherent, meaning each person's sexuality is part of their identity. There's no such thing as one type of sexuality or one real sexuality or one true sexuality. Everybody's sexuality is just kind of a product of who they are. We don't really know why. We just know that it's part of who you are. Our stimulation and arousal, so the way that we're stimulated, the way that we're aroused by people, is relatively stable. Meaning, throughout our lifespan, what turns us on is going to turn us on, and it's not really going to change. It might become more sophisticated. It might expand in some small way, but we're not going to like one thing one year and then not like it the next. So you can't, there's no such thing as a person being gay today and not tomorrow, right? Like if you're stimulated and aroused by men, it's at one point in your life you're most likely also going to be attracted by men at another point. If you're attracted by women at some point in your life, you're probably going to still be attracted to them. It may be at a lesser degree, but you're still going to have that attraction. Who we're attracted to, such as the genders of the people we're attracted to, personal characteristics of the people we're attracted to, is fluid over time. Now, what does that mean? What does the fluidity of sexuality mean? What does not mean semen? Um, I need a laugh track, man. Like, it's hard to do this class without, because you have to make jokes, otherwise it's uncomfortable. Um, what I mean by sexuality being fluid, though, is that it's like our personality. It's like any other aspect of our identity. It's pretty much at its core the same, but it sophisticates over time. It becomes more complex. And so sexuality's fluidity refers to the ability of a person to really learn more about who they really are. For example, there are plenty of men out there who have always been with women, always been attracted to women, and one day they meet a man, and that man does it for them. And it's the first, probably the last time it'll ever happen, but that person is just their person, and the fact that they're a man does not matter. They just love that person, and that's what the fluidity of sexuality means. It means that our sexuality is not bound to a very narrow singular identity. We have the capacity to love anyone that we want. Um, it's just not for everyone. For most people, it's going to be a little bit more singular, right? Um, the desire for sex and arousal and stimulation, so the way that we're aroused by people, the way that we're stimulated, does not differ between genders or sexual orientation. Women and men get off pretty similar ways, and it doesn't matter if you're straight or gay or bi or lesbian or asexual, though I suppose if you're asexual, you probably don't, like, you're not as aroused in quite the same way, if at all. But for the most part, it's the same. So there's no such thing as like there's no difference, right? It's all the same. Arousal it feels the same, works the same way no matter who you are. When it comes to sexual behaviors, there are many different explanations for why. And so I said that sex or sexuality is biological and psychological. So what is this biological aspect of sex? Well, one, we have this evolutional imperative to reproduce. In other words, it's ingrained in our very core that we must reproduce, that we have to carry on our genes. It's the way that a species survives, is through reproduction. And it used to be, before modern medicine, you needed to reproduce as often as you could because viable offspring were very rare. You may have 16 kids but only see 2 reach adulthood. So you need to have as many kids as possible. And what we've end up seeing now in the 21st century, we don't need that because we can pretty much be guaranteed with a high percent of accuracy that our offspring will be viable, that there's nothing going to happen to them. But we still have this drive to reproduce as much as we can, and we have this drive when we are at our reproductive peak, um, our our height, which is in our late adolescence, early 20s. is when we're at our peak reproductive time in our life. And so that's why people in my generation and your generation have a lot of sex, because we have this biological drive, this urge, this need it's instinctive. It's not anything we can control to reproduce. Now, we may not actually want to reproduce. We may not actually like emotionally, psychologically want to have kids, but our body does. Not necessarily want to have kids. Our body just knows that we have to do this. On the other side, so getting away from instinct, it just feels good, right? It stimulates, it's exciting, it's fun, and it has to be, because if you really think about what you're doing when you have sex, it's disgusting. It's nauseating. Why would anybody do that? It's gross. It's messy. It's about vulnerability. It's about exposing yourself to another person in a physical and emotional way, and it's a very if it didn't feel good, it would be incredibly traumatic and you wouldn't want to have it again. And so it feels good for a reason. Now, from a psychological standpoint, we do have a desire for sex that's rooted in who we are psychologically. So, for example, sex stimulates the brain's reward center and it releases dopamine. I mean, sex is dope, yo. Like, like it has the same effect as like drinking or eating chocolate cake. Like you literally it releases hormones that make you feel amazing. And that's why it feels good. On the other side, there is the psychological drive. Um, Romantic arousal, for example, when you love someone and you have romantic feelings for a person, meaning you care about them in a very deep way, that translates into a psychological desire to have sex with them. Not because you necessarily want to reproduce, but because you want to be intimate with them and as far as you can be. Um, Along with that comes trust. Having sex with someone requires that you trust them to some degree. Now we can have no strings attached hookups, right? But you still there's still a little trust involved. But when you have like a psychological desire for sex, it's because you trust that person and you want to be intimate with them. And there's this desire for intimacy and connection. Having sex is a very intimate act, and it does put you into this place where you have connected with someone on a very deep level. The interesting thing about this dichotomy between the biological and the psychological is that the biological does not always produce the psychological. In other words, we can have sex with anybody that we think would be a fun sexual partner. And all of that mostly is instinct. We see someone where that person is a good reproductive partner. I want to have sex with them. We can do that. We can enjoy the simulation and excitement of sex and fulfill that inherent need that we have to have sex. And that is completely biological and there's no psychological in it at all. We don't care. Maybe it makes us feel good about ourselves, but at the we don't there's no psychological connection, right, that's going on. On the other side, you can see someone who you are not biologically driven to have sex with. You don't have that desire isn't there, but you do have psychological connection with them. You care about them very deeply. They mean everything to you. They are your entire world. And it doesn't make sense. It makes absolutely no sense. But you just feel a connection with them and you know that they're the person that you want to be with. Whether it's whether it's clear to you that that is the case or not, you do in fact instinctively know that that's the person that you need to be with. Um, and you trust them and you desire emotional intimacy with them and connection with them on a very deep level. And that psychological desire for them does, in fact, lead to a biological desire over time. It takes a while. Um, the psychological almost always does lead to the biological attraction. Um, but we've unfortunately gotten to this place in our cultural narrative where it's all about passion. It's all about and biological. This biological is passion based. So I'm passionate about this person. I want this like hot, steamy relationship. The psychological is much more difficult. It's a side of sexuality that requires work, that requires commitment, that requires a long term. And the reality is, and we'll talk about this when we talk about relationships, but I'll talk about it now as well. This biological drive lasts for a while and then it peaks and then it goes away. And anyone who's been married for more than 5 years will tell you, yeah, after a while it was like, that biological, bump chicka wah wah is like, it goes, and then you may have, when you start out, a fairly high psychological desire for someone, and about the time the biological peaks, that psychological desire starts to go up, and it remains steady for the rest of your life. And this is why marriages fall apart a lot of times after about the 5 year mark, because the passion, the physical passion goes away, and if you don't have that psychological connection, it may not be enough. It may start out pretty low. You have high physical desire for them, low romantic or psychological desire for them. It peaks, but it doesn't. It's not enough. It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't make up for where this other one lacks, and so the relationship fizzles out, and you're like, like you're in on both sides. And we've all, I think a lot of us, I won't say we all have, a lot of us have been there. Um, None of my relationships have lasted 5 years, but I can say from personal experience in the relationships that I have had is that biological like enjoyment of them goes away pretty fast. And then if the psychological just isn't up there, it's just kind of like, it's like physically you're like, psychologically you're like, and when you've got two it's like that's it, it's over. Um, but like I said, we'll talk about relationships in a couple lectures. So how does sexual orientation play into sexuality? Well, it's an important component of sexuality. Now, sexual orientation is completely psychological, though it does have physical components. Specifically, it's an individual set of physical and psychological attractions, arousals, and responses to other people. It's a way that we define how we feel. So, sexual orientation develops as our organs begin to mature. Sexual organs begin to mature. So, about the time we start to feel arousal, we start to notice the people and the types of people that we're attracted to physically and emotionally. Attraction tends to be spontaneous and natural. There's not like an intentionality to it. It's not like you go out and say, I'm gonna like a dude, or I'm gonna like a girl. It's like it just happens. Usually you don't really know that it's gonna happen until it does, and then it happens, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Um, Now, there are some exceptions to this. So, for example, if you identify as LGB plus, sometimes it's hard for this to happen. It can be delayed because you're in a restrictive environment. You may feel attracted to guys or girls, but you may resist it. You may push back on it. You may make an intentional decision to be attracted to members of the opposite sex because you believe that it's wrong to be gay, when the reality is being attracted to people of the same sex is normal. Um, it's so normal, in fact, that 1,500 animal species have same sex attraction, and 91% of giraffes are gay. So, giraffes are like the ultimate gay icon, right? So, like, it's a very natural thing that occurs in the animal kingdom. It's just, in human beings, we just have assigned a value to it that's not very high. So, um, now I assigned reading to you that talked about what we know and what we don't know about sexual orientation. The reality is we don't really understand it. And the reason we don't understand it is because science has not been allowed to investigate it for legal reasons, for cultural reasons. I mean, it was hard to get public articles on homosexual relationships and homosexual sex for a long time. It's only recently if we've really been able to really see publication in mainstream journals. Um, but what we do know is that sexual orientation is complex. It's not black and white. Um, I've had people say to me, "I'm completely gay" or "I'm completely straight," and I always kind of laugh to myself and think, "No, you're not." It's so much more complicated than that. It's not. There's no such thing as being completely one thing or another. It's a continuum, and we're all on it in some varying degree. Everyone has the capacity to love anyone that they want and to be attracted to anyone that they want. They just tend to be more attracted to some people over others. Um, and it would be interesting to me, and this is all conjecture now, it'd be interesting to me to see what human sexuality would look like if we did not put any kind of value on it or any kind of judgments on it. We just let it occur the way that it will and just let people love whoever they want to love. I personally think my hypothesis is just a hypothesis is that if we took off all cultural expectations regarding sex and sexuality, if we allowed people to be who they are without forcing them into any kind of cultural roles, my hypothesis is that everybody would be what we would call pansexual. In other words, people would just love who they want to love. And it would be about people and not about body parts, not about anything like that. I think that we condition, and I'm biased. Maybe I'm biased because I do identify as pansexual. But my personal experience with this has been that I thought I was gay, obviously, because I liked men when I was living as a man. And then when I came out as trans, I said, well, I guess I'm not gay, I'm straight. And then lo and behold, a year and a half later, I'm dating a woman, and it was like one of those surprising, unexpected experiences. I mean, I was very much into men. You ask anybody from my past will tell you she liked men. There was never any remote possibility of me ever, ever being with a woman. And then I met this girl and I liked her. I was drawn to her. And I'm like, I'm going to go with this. And then I dated another woman. And it was equally, well, so the second woman I dated was trans. So she wasn't living as a woman when I met her. But she came out shortly after we started dating, and it was like to me not a it was no deal at all. Actually, I was like, I love this person, I don't care, whatever. Um, and I don't know, it changed my whole perspective on this because I realized that I had been forcing myself into this very rigid category because of this attraction that I felt that I wasn't able to express, and then for some reason because I had repressed one aspect of my sexuality for so long, I overcompensated for it. And so I really wish people would not restrict themselves when it comes to their sexuality and say, well, I'm only this way or I'm only that way. Because I think that if you really open yourself to love, you can love anyone. But maybe I'm just pan and I'm just biased. I don't know. Like I said, it's complicated. It's incredibly complicated. We'll never know. I don't think we'll ever know the full reality of it. At least not in our lifetime. Um, there are things about there are things about a lot of things that we don't know very much about because we have a limited capacity to understand things. So that's my 10 cents. I guess it's more than 10 cents since you're paying a lot of money for this class, but um, that's sexual orientation. So there are many different types of orientation that a person can have. This is in alphabetical order, so we'll start at the top. Asexual, or ace, is the community's preferred term. This is when you have little to no sexual attraction or physical attraction, and it's or little. Okay, let me say it again. Little to no sexual attraction, or physical attraction is dependent upon romantic connection. So it's more complicated than just no sex at all. There are some asexual people or ace people that are like, no, I'm not into sex at all. No sexual attraction, no romantic attraction, leave me alone. Okay, that's one aspect of it. There's some where you have it, but it's very limited. There's other where you have physical attraction, and it's just like physical attraction that you would see in any other sexual orientation, but it's dependent on whether or not you have a romantic attraction. So the biologic does not exist until that romantic or psychological attraction is there. Um, and the cool thing about ace identity is it actually can supersede all of these others. So you can be ace and bi, or ace and lesbian, or ace and pan, or ace and poly. It's sort of a it's not a standalone, right? Like it's it's sort of a secondary aspect or a primary aspect, you could say. It depends on how you identify it. It's a complementary. I love that. It's a complementary sexuality to these others. It can be. Now, if you have zero sexual attraction whatsoever, then obviously it's a standalone, but it can complement these others. And so you can be bisexual, but you don't have any kind of attraction to either males or females until the romantic attraction is there. Okay? Bisexual or bi, this is attraction to both males and females. So you're attracted to men and women. Gay and lesbian, this is attraction to the same sex. And also with bi and gay and lesbian, it's not dependent upon biological sex alone. So it could also be, you could be gay and attracted to a trans man, for example. It's not dependent upon biology. Pansexual or pan. This is physical attraction that's determined by romantic attraction and not physical characteristics. In other words, we like to say in the pan community, hearts not parts. We care about people. We don't really care what they have going on in their pants. Um, that doesn't mean we're not interested in what's going on in their pants. Once we're interested in what's going on in their heart, it just means that what's going on down there has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not you're interested in them. Polyamorous or poly, this is when you're attracted to multiple consenting partners simultaneously. And people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, I don't understand that. That is too much for me. Okay, well, hold on. Just chill out for a sec. We're going to talk about it. This is not the same thing as having an affair. Having an affair is when one person is sneaking around with another person when they partner with somebody else. That is having an affair, and that, my friends, is not poly relationships. No. In a poly relationship, okay, oh my god, I'm going to use inside out figurines and it's going to change everything. It's going to change your life. Okay, oh my god, I'm so excited. I've never had dolls before to demonstrate this. It's always so complicated. Okay, you have Joy, and Joy is polyamorous. And Joy is in a relationship with Fear, which is really not a good one to personify because polyamory is all about trust, and Fear rarely is trustful. Okay? So they're in a dyadic relationship. There's two of them. Okay? Okay, so remember Fear. He's going to go away for a little bit. Now, one day, Joy walks along and she meets Sadness. And she's like, ooh, bump chicka wunk wunk. And she's like, I really like her. And so they meet and they're attracted to each other. And so Joy is like, well, I've got a boyfriend, but I think I'm poly. So then she talks to her boyfriend Fear or her husband. I don't remember their partner. Let's just say her partner. And she said, Fear, I'm attracted to this other person. And Fear's like, okay, that's fine with me. We can be in a poly relationship. You've got these three people who are in a poly relationship with one central partner. So Fear is not in a relationship with Sadness. They're not in a relationship, but they know each other. They're friends. Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good. They are both dating this person. And they're all aware and they're all okay with it. Okay, so that's one type of poly relationship. Another could be Joy goes to Fear and says, "Hey, Fear, I met this girl. I think you would like her too. I think we should be in a poly relationship." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And so he meets Sadness, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, I like you. You're amazing." And then all three of them are in a relationship together. Okay, so all three of these people are in a relationship. That is also a poly relationship. Now, are we all together? It's going to get a little bit more complicated, but it's okay. I promise. So then sadness meets disdain. And sadness is like, oh, I like her. She's really beautiful. I wonder if the people in my triadic relationship, so these three people with whom all of these people are in a relationship. So they're all in a relationship with each other. They're in a relationship, they're in a relationship, and they're in a relationship. That is a triadic relationship. So, um, she's like, "Hey, I like this girl. Would you be interested in me and having her in our relationship?" And they meet disdain, and they're like, not really. I don't like her." But they're like, "Look, we don't really want her. We don't want to be in a relationship with her, but you can be." So then we've got this triad, this triadic relationship, and this dyadic relationship. So two people, three people, and they all are aware of each other. They're not in a relationship with her. Only they are in a relationship. Okay? Triadic plus a dyadic relationship. Okay? That is a polyamorous relationship. But wait, there's other combinations. Oh, this is so much fun. So one day, dun, 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 I love playing with dolls. This is hilarious. I love it. So one day, Fear is walking along and he meets Anger. Grrr! And he's like, oh my gosh, he's attractive. I want to be with him. And so he talks to Joy and to Sadness, and it's like, because they're in a relationship, they're in a triadic relationship. Disdain ain't part of this conversation because she is not in this relationship. So they have a conversation, and he's like, look, I want to have this relationship with this guy. Do you want him to be in our relationship? And they're like, they meet him, they're like, no, we're not really into him. So, but you can be in a relationship with him. So then, Fear and Anger are in a dyadic relationship, while Fear, Sadness, and Joy are in a triadic relationship, and Sadness and Disdain are in a dyadic relationship. So you have two dyadic relationships and a triadic relationship. Okay? So these are the common partners. This person is partnered with these people. This person, or with this person. This person is partnered with this person. And this is the commonality. And maybe these two people know each other and they're like, hey, we're friends, but we're not in a relationship with each other. That's exhausting. I'm so tired now. My brain is like, can't fathom this because I'm not poly, so it's hard for me to understand how it would work. But the reality is that it does, and that for poly people it makes sense, and it makes them happy, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing unscientific about it. There are plenty of animals who have multiple partners. I mean, hell, most animal species, there's one dominant male, and all the ladies like are with him. So I mean, it's not. And others, there's one chick, and all the dudes are with her. So it's like, um, it's normal. It's just we've not really considered it before. Um, I mean, it's always been part of our cultures that we've had, but it's never, at least in our culture in the U.S., has never been accepted really. So poly is also sort of like ace. It can be a complementary sexual orientation. You could be poly and gay, or poly and bi, or poly and ace, or poly and straight, or poly and pan, right? In fact, it is completely complementary because you're not just attracted to other poly people. Does that make sense? I mean, obviously, I guess it would be hard to be in a truly polyamorous relationship if all partners weren't at least some degree poly, because everyone has to agree and be okay with it, right? Um, it could be though. I don't know much about this. This is something that's very new to me, but it could be that one of the partners is like, I'm not poly, but I'm okay with my partner being that way. Um, I'm sure that's possible. I mean, it has to be. With as complex as it is, I'm sure it's something that happens. And then straight. I think we all. I don't know. Is everyone like? Does everyone understand straight? I mean, I know it's complicated. I know we don't talk about it very much in our society, and it's definitely not a sexual orientation that people really know about. Um, but it's just when you're attracted to people of the opposite sex, right? Okay. And then queer. Queer is a self-defined sexuality. So people who are queer, and Honestly, I really identify more as queer than pan. I'm just kind of like, for me, and I talked to another person who identifies as queer, and we had the same process. It was like, I got tired of trying to figure the labels out, and I'm just like, you know what, I'm Darcy, and I just like people, and I don't really care what they look like, or what size they are, what color they are, or what language they speak, or what nationality they are, or what their accent is, or, what their genitalia look like. Don't really care. I just if I like him, I like him, and that's just who I am. And I'm just kind of queer that way. So queer is just self-defined usually. There's not really a single definition. And the cool thing about queer is it also can be a gender orientation or gender identity as well. So you could be like, you know, queer gender-wise and just kind of be like, I borrow from different aspects of gender and that's it for me. You can also be, and then be queer sexually and be like, I also just kind of love whoever. Or you can be gay, but also identify as queer, from its gender identity perspective. Okay, when it comes to, this is an exhausting class, there's so much information. Thank you all for holding on. Um, in terms of same-sex attraction, we've had a pretty turbulent history in our country. Well, in Western society as a whole, in terms of same-sex attraction, and unfortunately, in North America, same-sex attraction and transgender identity, for that matter, were acceptable in native cultures. In fact, they were normal, very normal indeed. Um, and then Western culture, so European culture, came in and you know, Catholicized the hell out of the continent and got rid of it. So it's very unfortunate. It's actually incredibly unfortunate. Um, and in Eastern culture, it's the same way. It pretty much was a norm in many cultures until they were colonized by European countries, who then used their religion to really destroy that part of their cultural identity. Historically speaking, um, science has disapproved of same-sex attraction. Freud, our good friend, said that same-sex attraction was a result of inappropriate identification with opposite-sex parents. So if you were a guy and you had this identification with your mom, then you were gay. Okay. Um, show of hands, how many girls in this room are identify more with their dad than their mom? Okay. Now, show of hands, how many of you are lesbians? Right? How many of you really identify with your mom, love your mom, and have a deeper connection with your mom than your dad? How many of you are gay? Right. Like, it does not follow, statistically speaking, that your connection with one parent will result in you being one way or the other. I know guys who have lesbian moms, and they're very much straight. They didn't have a same sex parent to look up to. What about children of single moms? There's not like a disproportionate amount of gay children coming out of single parent relationships. So there's no statistics and science do not back up Freud. So Freud, that theory is garbage. The learning theory, social learning theory, would argue that we learn our same-sex attraction through pleasant same-sex encounters and dissatisfying opposite-sex encounters. So in other words, um, I can't do that. I can't use inside-out figures for that. So, two guys have sex with each other. It is really pleasant, emotionally, physically. They like each other, and then they both have sex with someone of the opposite sex, and it's not this. They don't enjoy it. It's not pleasant. It's bad. Um, they're like, okay, oh, I'm definitely gay now. It's like somehow you learn it. Um, but that has also been disproved. Um, you do not have to have a sexual experience or a romantic experience or any experience or contact whatsoever in order to know what your your sexual orientation is. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that you learn it in any way. It just happens. Um, our current research is focusing on hormones, and so there is some evidence to suggest that exposure to high levels of androgens in utero could lead to some forms of same-sex attraction. Again, it's still very early to say for sure. Um, we have seen we have linked same-sex attraction with maternal heredity, which suggests that it may be linked to the X chromosome. So maybe it's something that's transmitted to us through our genes, through from our mom. It's possible. There are a lot of, actually, at least one that I know of. Um, well, no, two, maybe even three people on my mom's side of the family who are gay. So that would make sense for me anyway. And then environment, of course, might play a role. I mean, you can't say, well, it's all environment or it's all science. I mean, in that article talked about that. It's not nature versus nurture. They both play a role. So again, we don't really know what causes same-sex attraction. We just know that it's normal. It's atypical. We don't see it as often, but it's still normal. Okay. Let's get away from same-sex attraction and talk about masturbation. I love talking about masturbation because it makes people so uncomfortable. Okay, I read an article the other day and it's pretty fascinating. Study has just demonstrated that men who masturbate 21 times a month are less likely to get prostate cancer. I think that's pretty cool. So the next time someone says masturbation is bad, you can say, well, actually, it reduces the likelihood of prostate cancer. And all the guys are like, mm-hmm. And all the girls like, uh-huh. And the guy's like, what? Girls masturbate? Yes, girls masturbate. Okay, so now that we've got that nonsense over, the average age that a person starts masturbating is 15. And people are like, what? That's average. So there are some people who wait a long time. In other words, I'm thinking that average may be skewed a little bit. When it comes to teenagers, 80% of teen boys and 20% of teen girls masturbate. So more teen boys are masturbating than girls are. I personally think that that is probably culturally influenced. Now, boys masturbate more frequently than girls do in early adolescence. So in those early years of adolescence, guys are masturbating all the time and girls are not as much. But at the other side of it, when it flips, girls start to increase the frequency at which they're masturbating while boys are not. Why would that be? Well, guys tend to have sex earlier than girls. So if you're having sex, you really don't have to masturbate as much. Whereas girls tend to not have sex as often or as early as guys because of different cultural views about guys and girls and their sexual behaviors. Now, religious views, myths about masturbation, embarrassment over lack of sexual partners also often result in shame for people who masturbate. Here's the deal. It's normal, it's healthy, it's important. It's an important and normal part of sexual exploration. It's important that you do it. And so there's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's yes, it could mean that you have a lack of sexual partners, but you could also reframe it and think, well, maybe I just like my own company, right? Like it's good. It's a good thing to masturbate. Is the takeaway message. Um, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. Guys, studies show 21 times a month. Girls, do with that what you will. Dating. Now, we will talk about dating later when we talk about relationships in adulthood, but in terms of adolescence, dating starts at a culturally defined age. So in some cultures, it could be 12, it could be 9. I've seen 9-year-olds with girlfriends and boyfriends. I don't really know what you have to talk about at 9, but maybe you have something like maybe there's some kind of video game or YouTube channel. I don't know. I don't know what 9-year-olds are doing these days. When I was 9, I was playing cops and robbers in the backyard. I was obviously the cop. Um, the sad thing is, teen dating is not successful at the cultivation of meaningful, intimate relationships. I wonder why. Well, it's because meaningful, intimate relationships involve talking about meaningful things. And I think when you're young, really young like that, it's hard to talk about meaningful things because you're not quite there yet. Um, and that really applies mostly to early and middle adolescence when you're still developing that more concrete or more abstract thinking. Now, deep romantic connections do occur in late adolescence. So if you have your high school sweetheart you're dating them in college or you're married to them, you probably do have a deep romantic connection, and I'm really happy for you. My sister married her high school sweetheart. They've been together for a long time, and they're doing really well. So, there you have it. I, on the other hand, I've had nothing but crusty relationships, so I can't speak to that. Now, in terms of LGBTQ plus adolescents, relationships can be difficult, and potentially self-esteem crushing. It's hard when you're having to date someone in a hostile environment, and when you have to have secret relationships. That secret relationships are not healthy. Um, if you're both not out and you're both keeping it a secret, like that, like you both desire to keep it a secret, well, that just perpetuates this idea that there's something wrong with you. You know, you're internalizing that idea. On the other hand, if one of you is out and the other one isn't, and you're having to keep it a secret, what kind of message does that send to the other partner? Like, that they're dirty, or if there's something wrong with them, or they're filth, or trash. Like, and I understand you have to do what you have to do for safety, but it's not healthy. It really isn't healthy, and it can be very destructive to your later relationships. So that's my it's not even an opinion, it's fact. It's harsh fact, but it is what it is. Um, Sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse is a major milestone in the perception of many adolescents. And so, for most people, it is a big deal to have sex, and when you have sex, and if you've had sex. Um, the thing is, the thing is, it's really not a big deal when it all goes away. It's not as big a deal as we think it is, but we make it out to be one, and it's because we make sex into this sort of specter that you don't talk about, you don't do till you're married, and it just creates this perception that there's something really fantastic about it. When it's really, at the end of the day, it's two people trying to reproduce. Um, the average age of our first sexual intercourse is declining, meaning it's going down. Um, so, I mean, that is either a good thing or a bad thing. I'm divided on it. I think that people should have sex when they're ready to have sex. And I'm hoping that that decline is because people are more sexually open to each other and not because people are just being pressured. Um, 20% currently have sex before the age of 15. Um, 75% have sex before their 20s, which means 5% have sex after their 20s. I like when I'm in the small percentages. Um, the average age of first sexual intercourse is 17. So most people about the age of 17, that makes sense too. You start to drive, it's a lot easier to have access. Um, there are some ethnic differences. Ethnic groups tend to have ethnic minority groups. Ethnic groups. Like ethnic is some kind of euphemism for something. Ethnic minority groups have sex earlier than white adolescents on average. And again, that's just a cultural difference. And I was talking, I went to a conference earlier this year, and I was talking to a man, a black man who researches um, dating relationships in black communities. And we were talking about it, and he was like, we talked about this figure. I don't remember how it came. Well, he gave a presentation. I was talking to him about it. Um, and I said, how do I explain this to my class? Because I hate saying this. Like, it sounds like it perpetuates the stereotype that ethnic minorities breed like rabbits. Like, which is absolutely wrong and very racist stereotype. And I'm like, I don't understand, like, why does this exist on it? I don't, will you explain to me from your research what you've seen? And his answer was so tragic. It broke my heart. He said that I don't have like a clear-cut statistical answer, but this is what I've seen in my research. Because he does qualitative research, so he gets people to like talk about their life and their stories and their feelings, and then he codes it. And so he said, I'm still in the process of coding, but what I've seen so far is that most black men say that they want to have sex with as many people as possible because they don't think they're going to live to see their 30s, and they want to make sure that they leave a legacy, their kids. And I thought, wow, that is one of the saddest things I've ever heard. That there's this sort of survival aspect to it where these ethnic minority men don't think they're going to make it. And they're probably not, statistically speaking, going to make it. And so they reproduce, on average, earlier and more often because they're trying to reproduce so that they can. And I just think that's really tragic. So that's why that statistic is the way that it is. Um, yeah. Okay. So sexual behaviors. Um, there are many different types of sexual behaviors that adolescents engage in, that adults engage in. They include deep kissing, so that's like really making out. Like that's not a peck on the cheek. That's like getting in there. If you know what I mean. Massaging and petting, oral sex, anal sex, and vaginal sex. Um, and we'll talk more next time, next class, about possible risks associated with different types of sexual intercourse. There are different possible outcomes that could come from sexual behaviors. Deeper emotional intimacy is one of them. It often does happen, especially if there is a psychological attraction there. It's fun. So that's another outcome that you could have. But on the other side, there's some other less happy outcomes for a lot of people, especially teenagers. Pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections are two incredibly um, negative outcomes that can come from teen sexual behaviors. And we will talk on Monday about those. In terms of gender, so this is the gender identity portion of the class, and it's going to be very brief. Um, when it comes to sexual behaviors, men have a 5 minute or less commitment in intercourse. In other words, um, all a man has to do is make a deposit, make a transfer of his gamete to um, the other partner, and it takes about 5 minutes for that to occur. Um, women have a 9 month minimum commitment in intercourse. So, from a social perspective, when a man is about to have sex or making a decision to have sex, he only has to give up 5 minutes of his life. A woman has to give up 9 months at a minimum. More often, though, 18. Minimum 9, 18 max. And so women tend to be much more cautious about who they have sex with because they're not going to, and a lot of times it's instinctive, but they're not going to reproduce with someone that is not going to give them, one, a viable offspring, and then two, make sure that offspring makes it to adulthood. There are also a lot of double standards that exist in sexual behaviors. So women typically are shamed for losing their virginity. We slut shame women who have sex outside of marriage. Um, and we see this all the time when we talk about women's sexual behaviors. For example, in a political campaign, a man can make an explicit sexual comment um, about a woman, a rapey comment, proudly embrace it, and still get elected as president. A woman's husband has an affair, and that's brought up like it's some kind of legitimate matter of discussion, and if a woman running for office was sexual in any way, we would be all over that because we shame women for having sex. Men, on the other hand, are shamed if they don't have sex. So if you haven't lost your virginity as a man, then there's something wrong with you. And I think that's ridiculous. those double standards are ridiculous. People should have sex when they want to, with whomever they want to, as long as everyone's consenting and it's legal. Who cares? Um, our standards for women are also more strict than for men. A man can have sex with whoever he wants to. Nobody really bats an eyelash. If you have sex as a college guy, your mom and your dad are going to be irritated with you, but they're not going to get upset. If your sister has sex with a guy, oh my gosh, the entire world will come crumbling down around her, and it will be like the biggest scandal, and it's just awful. And we hold women accountable always for everything. A woman gets raped and we hold her accountable for it. Well, what was she wearing? How much was she drinking? How many partners has she had? Was she known as is she known as a slut? Like for some reason any of those things matter at all. So we have this double standard. Um, but we are moving in a direction where it's permissive to be sexually loose. Don't get me started. I could do a sermon on virginity and on sexual elusivity, but I'm not going to because that's not what you signed up for. Um, but we're moving to a direction where if as long as you have affection, having sex with someone isn't a big deal anymore. Um, we're moving that way. We're not there yet, but we are moving that way. In terms of gender identity, the only major change that we see in adolescence is a move towards gender typing. So the period of sort of safer, freer gender exploration really comes to an end in adolescence. We start seeing gender intensification occurring, and this is increased gender stereotyping of attitudes and behaviors. In other words, um, everything becomes gendered. You wear a pink shirt. Oh, that's a girl color. Or are you gay? Because we, of course, feminize gay identity, since gay men can only be feminine. They can't possibly be masculine. I mean, have you ever met Michael Sam, like, first openly gay NFL player? Like, masculine, what a masculine man. Like, don't even get me started. But, we, we, we move into this direction that we never really recover from, where we gender everything that we do. You know, that's a girl sport, that's a guy sport, that's a girl activity, that's a guy activity. Hell, we even talk about the way cars are, like the way cars look. Well, girls keep their cars messy, but guys keep their cars clean. What does that even mean? Like, really? I've met some girls who have really clean cars and some guys who have some really messy cars. Like, that's ridiculous. We have to gender everything, and it happens in adolescence. And typically during this period, adolescents move towards a more traditional gender identity. When I say more traditional, I mean like cisgender, like more and definitely more binary. And that's because of this intensification. We force things to be gender, we force people to conform to gender. Um, and in puberty, we start to think of ourselves in a sex oriented way. And that's because all of these sexual changes are happening to us. And so we start to have a hard time disconnecting our gender, our social identification with roles and behaviors, with the changes that are occurring to our body. Fortunately, all of this declines in late adolescence. So once you get through puberty, it starts to slow down a little bit and you kind of even out a little bit more. So the good thing is that gender typing does go down and it actually declines. It does have a natural decline. And by middle adulthood, gender differences get to be so like in terms of social behaviors are so slight. People are much more gender neutral because you stop having this need to type yourself. Okay, thank you for your attention today, and I just want to end class on this note, and I'll end the next class this way as well. We talked about some things that for some people are controversial. We talked about some things that for some people may be uncomfortable, and I want you to know two things. One, your sexuality is your business. Nobody can tell you what it is. Nobody can define it for you. Nobody can tell you that your sexuality is wrong. Your sexuality is your sexuality, and you define it. You label it. If you're a straight man but you're attracted to a guy and you still identify as a straight man, you identify as a straight man. You call it what you need to call it. If you're a woman and you're in a relationship with a trans man and you identified as a lesbian and then your partner came out as a trans man and you're in a relationship with him and you still identify as a lesbian, then you're a lesbian. That's who you are. It's your identity. That's all that matters. Um, and I don't want anybody to leave this class feeling that they have to be a certain way. You are who you are, and that's all that matters. The other thing that I want to leave you with is we did talk about sex. And it's important that we talked about sex because in our culture, especially in North Dakota, we don't talk about it. Sex is a normal part of human life. It's a normal part of all life. If we did not have sex, we would not have life at all. And as we have evolved, sex has become more of a social experience than a purely biological one. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I want you to know that you having sex, is your decision. It is your right. It is your body, and it is your right to protect your body and to make decisions for your body. No one should ever force you to have sex. You shouldn't feel pressure to have sex. You shouldn't feel like this lecture was me shaming you if you don't believe any of these things about sex. This lecture was not trying to convince you that you ought to have sex. This lecture is just meant to teach you about it so that when you make the decision that you're ready to have sex, you understand what your body is going through and you understand what psychologically you're going through. The time that you have sex, when you have sex, where you have sex, who you have it with is your decision. And that's all that matters. Not when, not where, not how, not with whom, but that you made that decision. And I want you to know that walking out of this class, that it is your decision. If anyone needs anything, if you're having issues with things we talked about, if you've had a sexual experience that was not something that you wanted, that you were forced into, I am here, that we can talk about it, and I can connect you with the resources that you need. My email is darcy.corbett, C-O-R-B-I-T-T, Hall, H-A-L-L, at NDSU.edu. Please reach out if you need me, and I'm happy to talk with you and to help you find the resources that you need. Okay? You're valuable and you're important. And it's important to me that when you take this class, that you leave knowing more about your body and about your development than you did when you came in. Now, for class on Monday, you need to read pages 401 to 415. And I want you to think about this question. Is adolescence, or the period of adolescence, is it more psychologically turbulent than any other period of development? Okay, that's your thought question to ask yourself as you're reading. Remember, there's no quiz this week, and also you need to do your social problem nomination for the project, and that is due Monday. Um, I thought I deleted this. Good grief. Every time I do it because I enjoy talking. I enjoy being mad at myself. Nothing is due today, so you're good to go. I will see you all Monday. Have a wonderful, safe, and enjoyable weekend. Hopefully, it won't be as hot. Bye.